I'm here today in office hours with Matthew VanBesien, and Matthew is the president of the University Musical Society, one of the premier musical societies in the world. And Matthew previously was the president and grand poobah of the New York Philharmonic. Matthew, welcome to Office Hours, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be with you, and I have to say this is a very cool interview. I've never done something like this before, so thank you.
So I want to start out with, you've devoted your life to the performing arts, and obviously this is something that we share in common because creativity and innovation in the performing arts are all kind of sisters. Tell me why the performing arts matter, particularly today. There's a lot of pressure for money, and tell me why they matter.
Well, I think there are a lot of different reasons that they matter. And of course, all of us who are passionate about the arts and who believe in the intrinsic power of music and theater and dance love to talk in this sort of nebulous, sort of dreamy way about art for art's sake. And that's not to say that that's not a very valuable conversation, because there were certain people, including, well, frankly, probably the last president to really articulate it well was JFK. But there's no question that the arts are what make us human. And I think there's the great quote from Winston Churchill about the arts and cutting the arts budget. And then he sort of said, if we cut the arts, then what are we fighting for during the Second World War? So I don't think there's a lot, we should spend too much time sort of debating the intrinsic value of the arts in society and in humanity. But I think there's some really great practical reasons that the arts matter today. And I think you're feeling in this current environment, and there's so many things in the world that are uncertain right now, I'm feeling this gravitational pull to the arts right now by our audiences for reasons that they're conscious of, and probably for quite a few that they're not conscious of. But I think the arts quite simply make us better people, in ways that we're conscious of and unconscious of. But the arts also are working harder than ever today to think about how they change people's lives, directly and indirectly, in terms of how they see the world, in terms of how they view problem solving, and certainly how they view the creative process.
Well, one of the things that's of real interest to me is how people become, innovators and creative. Tell me a little bit about how you got into this field, and a little bit about your journey to be kind of not only an artist, but kind of over and an impresario, in a sense, to all kinds of artists.
Well, now that I'm back here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, I can say this very openly, that I'm a good kid from the Midwest who was just a kind of a normal kid and who found classical music at the age of 12 or 13, and it completely transformed my life. So I'm living proof that I was a kid with relatively good grades, but probably relatively directionless, and it gave me that direction in my life. Now, I thought it gave me a direction around being a professional French horn player, but what I realized later was that I had a much deeper and inner drive around creativity and how you pull resources together to make interesting things happen. I'm not sure that really answers your question, but that's
no, but it does. It's no different than a business. There's a lot there. The art of making art is putting it together, right? Sondheim's famous thing.
Yeah.
Now, talk a little bit about one of the things that I get involved in on a pretty regular basis. I get sort of pulled into these art situations, these artistic organizations are filled with the most creative people in the world, but sometimes their business practices are not so creative, if you know what I mean. So tell me a little bit about what are the biggest challenges right now that you see in your area, and maybe some ideas about solutions to this that you've been thinking about.
Well, look, I think let me just say that there are a myriad of challenges that the performing arts face at any given time, and some of those are long-held challenges, and some of those are newer. I think right now we're working in an environment in which we're trying to adapt to the change in consumer behavior in terms of the way in which people make decisions about and consume, if you will, the arts and culture. I think we're certainly looking at major issues around like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we finally become intentional in the arts around our art forms being representative. But the age-old question for the arts, and this goes all the way back to the very beginning, even during the Renaissance period, is the intersection of arts and commerce, and call it the intersection between the art and the money. And there's an inherent friction there. And to your question from the very beginning, I always like to say that when anybody's doing a job like mine, or running the New York Philharmonic, or running the Mariinsky Ballet, anybody, well, maybe not just anyone, but there are a lot of people out there who can program and put together an incredibly vibrant artistic season. And there are many people who could put together the most cautious, prudent financial season. Where you really want to end up is, where do those two things intersect at the most optimal point in any given time? And that's the inherent challenge of the arts today.
Well, let's talk about that. My new book is called The Innovation Code, The Creative Power of Constructive Conflict. And my research has basically said that really incredible creativity comes when people have different ideas. They respect each other personally, but their ideas are different, and they create hybrids. Now, one of the things I see going on in orchestras, and I'd like you to get your take on this, is orchestras are typically funded by people who've made money in life. Usually, a lot of times, one person has survived another person, and they've got money. It's often a woman, right? And she's going to give money, or he's going to give money to the Philharmonic. And they really have a tremendous passion for this. But a lot of times they give money for sort of a traditional kind of a venues, things that are perpetuating those certain classics. But the challenge is, your new audience are millennials, and they have really different ideas about what they want to hear. So in one sense, you've got commerce. The people who are giving you money and love you want one thing, but the people you need to attract to be vital in the future maybe want another. How do you think about that, and what do you do about that?
Well, I mean, that's another huge variable in the equation, and I think the whole changing nature of philanthropy is not at all restricted to the performing arts and music. I mean, I think you're seeing it full stop across the entire philanthropic landscape, and you're seeing a whole next generation of philanthropists now who kind of don't see themselves as philanthropists. I think they see themselves as investors, and that's a very different type of dynamic. Now, we would all like to think that our donors are in fact investors, and that we're going to generate some kind of tangible return on that investment, whether it's artistically or from an audience standpoint, or providing access to people, with different socioeconomic backgrounds. But this change is really, and it's not as simple as a generational thing, because you have long-standing donors who understand that the art forms need to evolve and need to become more progressive. And so I think the bigger challenge is a larger societal one, which is, what is philanthropy, and to a bigger question, what is loyalty going to look like in the future?
Well, that's it. Let's put this now into a smaller frame. You came from the largest arts community in the world, basically, to a small town in the Midwest. So tell me a little bit about what you think the differences are between being part of the New York Philharmonic and what that represents, and being part of the University Music Society and what that represents.
Well, I had a great advantage during first of all, I'm from a more smaller city like Ann Arbor, in terms of towns I grew up in, and largely in university settings as well. So this feels very familiar to me. And I also had the chance along the way to work for organizations of varying sizes and in different types of markets, both geographically, but also in terms of kind of the commercial and business landscapes that each of them have. But what's interesting, whether it's an orchestra or a dance company or a theater troupe or a jazz ensemble, even ones that have $1 million budget versus a $100 million budget, there's some things that are very much in common. And again, those threads are, further developing and holding on, retaining, but also expanding the audience base, this shifting landscape of philanthropy and loyalty, and really trying to find a way as organizations to be representative, both in terms of how and what we program, but the audiences that we serve. And frankly, those challenges are fundamentally the same whether you're at the New York Philharmonic or at the University Musical Society. Each community is different, and each community has its strengths and weaknesses, and you try to figure out a way how to navigate those, as an organization. There's no one size fits all. But I have to tell you, it's fun being. I mean, we are lucky here in Ann Arbor. We live in a disproportionately curious and culturally vibrant, and there's just such intellectual curiosity and commitment here that it gives us a chance to really push the envelope in our programming and see how far we can go.
But you've got these huge challenges, and it sounds like they're your priorities. What if we could have one innovation, one solution that we could work on today, you and I could work on, and we're going to support you on some stuff here. Give me one thing you would love to see that would really help you with these challenges.
Wow, that's a big question. I'm not sure we have enough time today, but I think it's it's what you and I talked a little bit already offline about, and I mean literally offline, which is what is loyalty going to look like for the modern consumer? And I know that sounds very corporate in terms of what the arts. What the arts do, because people see it as part of almost a social compact.
Right.
And there's deep loyalty generationally around arts organizations, whether they be orchestras or ballet companies or opera companies or theater. But here's the good news. The next generation has an insatiable appetite for many different things. And of course, through technology, they have the ability to actually experience those things in a way that certainly even you and I growing up never had the opportunity to do. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. I think, without generalizing, this is an audience and a consumer base now that loves to move around constantly.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily say, I'm going to pick a horse and that's going to be my horse from now until I'm no longer here on this earth. And that's a big change for arts organizations. So it means that we have to be really, really savvy about how we think about what we do and how we connect with people. But that's my big question that I'm thinking about right now, which is, what does loyalty look like in this modern, digitally driven age?
So let's build on that. So I'm a young person. Of course, I'm not. But if I were a young person,
you're certainly young at heart, Jeff.
I'd be asking myself a couple questions. I'd be asking myself, how can I get more fully engaged in the kind of work that you're doing in the arts? And then how would I know if there was a career in this for me or something that was just even more than engagement? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, I like to think that we are less siloed than we used to be in terms of the rest of the real world, as I like to refer to it. I mean, we're more happy and more engaged now to have a dialogue with other disciplines, and I personally really, as you know, I really enjoy interfacing with the business community and in discussions around leadership in the most sort of holistic sense. But I always say to young people who are contemplating, having a career not just in the arts but specifically in leadership in the arts, I always say to them there are enormous opportunities, and no matter what field you're talking about within the arts, there's a huge need for talented, smart, passionate people. And one of the things that I always say to people, they always say, well, how do I start? And I would say, here's how you start. Find an opportunity, jump in, head first, roll your sleeves up, and get to it. There's no substitute for just diving in and figuring out what this is all about. And hopefully you'll be lucky and find someone, who's a great mentor and really provides the kind of guidance like I had actually when I was first coming into the business.
I think this is exciting. I have a lot of MBAs and undergraduates who are, they start by pursuing, these hardcore business careers. And a lot of them end up saying, well, what I'm really interested in is creativity, the arts, all this. So it sounds like there's some room here. Now, one of the big things is, what is it we can do to support your work? How can we be helpful to what you're doing, not just at UMS, but sort of in the arts? What could the people watching this do?
Well, I think there are a lot of key questions, some of which we've talked about today, that, on the surface of it, I think sometimes people from the outside or people within the business community might look at those challenges and say, That can't be that difficult. Well, I'm here to tell you, if those things were not very difficult, somebody would have already figured them
Yes.
out. And we've had the benefit at many times, and you and I worked on things where we found a way to bring some pretty spectacular resources to the table to think about problem solving.
Yep.
But I think there are probably these two main areas, and I hate to keep sort of beating on this horse, but the help around innovation and helping us think about how do we not only connect to a larger audience, how do we engage them, and how do we build a relationship with them over the long haul? What does that look like today? And I think we're not scratching our heads all the time about this, but we're really wondering what that's going to look like. Dan, I can't imagine these same questions aren't being asked, in the marketing shops at P&G or some of the really big consumer businesses. They must be wondering.
Yes.
So we're wondering that too. So, for all of you out there, please help us think about this. And the second thing is for people to understand that the arts are for them and that participation is key. And, so often I think people are intimidated or sort of put off or think that there's nothing in the arts that are going to be relevant for, I would say the people like our team here at UMS and at so many organizations around the country are really working to provide points of entry for people that, whether it's a Game of Thrones concert or, a great jazz program or, the most traditional classical kind of music, but presented in an entirely fantastic new way.
Yep.
We're pushing on, we're trying to fire on all cylinders to figure out how we make this great art more approachable.
So how do we learn more about what's going on at UMS, maybe some performances? How do we connect? Where do we go?
Yeah, so the best place to go is ums.org, our website, because it's really where you can find the most information about UMS. Obviously, we're on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. I would say Facebook and our website are the best places, but we're going to be doing more and more to talk to the public about what we do and how we do it. I think we may be the only performing arts series that has an opening night that's a thing at Bill's Beer Garden with the greatest New Orleans pianist ever, Henry Butler, done as sort of a large-scale kind of fun community event, great craft beers, and, some of the greatest New Orleans piano music of all time. I like that that's the way in which we start a season. It's not black tie. Yep. It's not stuffy people walking down a red carpet, but something that's really accessible and fun, and there's a lot more of that where that came from.
Matthew, thank you so much. Matthew VanBesien, the president of the University Music Society. Thanks for having some office hours with me today. I greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to supporting you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. Take care.